And welcome to this edition of Security and Compliance Weekly. On today's show, we're going to explore data privacy laws and how they are and will be impacting both security and compliance programs in organizations throughout the land. To help facilitate this discussion, we are joined today by Chris Penn. He is VP for Privacy and Security at a little company called PKWARE. Chris is going to talk about data privacy in general, but the discussion is really predicated on the recent passing of just the second data privacy law in the United States, which happened to be in Virginia. So join us as we continue our journey of tearing down silos and building bridges on Security and Compliance Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. And now, it's the show that bridges the requirements of regulations, compliance, and privacy with those of security. Your trusted source for complying with various mandates, building effective programs, and current compliance news. It's time for Security and Compliance Weekly.
Welcome to episode number 72 of Security and Compliance Weekly, recorded on May 4th, 2021. I'm your host, Mr. Jeff Mann, and joining me today are my data privacy conscious co-hosts, Mr. Scott Lyons and Mr. Josh Marpet. Welcome, gentlemen, and of course, the obligatory May the 4th be with you.
Nah. That's just for no good rebels. It's Revenge of the 5th. Tomorrow, that's when the Empire
The way I
celebrates.
see it, we can just drink both days, but whatever.
We could.
We could.
Depends on how many times you say PCI, Jeff.
We'll see how that comes up today, whether PCI has anything to do with privacy or not. Anyway, before we jump into it, I do have a couple announcements. Security Weekly listeners can save $100 on their RSA Conference 2021 All Access Pass. RSA Conference is going to be fully virtual again this year, and it's from May 17th through May 20th. Gee, that's like coming up in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. 2 weeks, I can do the math. Security Weekly will be live streaming Monday through Thursday that week in the virtual broadcast alley, interviewing some of the top sponsors and some of the speakers that are speaking at the event. To register using our discount code, go to securityweekly.com/RSAC 2021 and use the code 5U, that's uniform, 1 cyber. We hope to see you there. Also, if you have any specific guest or topic suggestions that you would love for us to cover on this or any of our shows, you can submit your suggestions by going to securityweekly.com/guests. You will find a form there, fill it out. We review them on the regular, and we'll reach out to you once we've reviewed your submission. Alrighty. So, little setup for today's conversation. How did we find Mr. Chris Penn? Because of my affiliation with Security Weekly, I'm on several media mailing lists. I get the media journalist passes to conferences like RSA and Black Hat, and the obligatory mailing list comes from that. Very often, probably 98 times out of 100, the emails are, hey, we've got a great topic or person or quotation for whatever the next article is you're going to write. And I kind of like, okay, dismiss those. They don't know that I'm a podcaster. But once in a while, they actually say, hey, we've got somebody we'd like you to interview on your show, or we think this is an interesting topic for your podcast. And if they happen to act like they know who I am and what I'm about, I read it. And that is how I met Chris Penn today. I was contacted by his PR firm and introduced Chris and the topic. And I thought, that's actually a decent topic for this show. Let's do it. So that is how Mr. Chris Penn, VP of Privacy and Security, arrived to talk with us today about the new Virginia data privacy law and data privacy in general and how it applies to security and compliance. So without further ado, Chris, welcome to Security and Compliance Weekly.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. Pleasure to be here.
So excited to have you today. Hey, I want to obviously get to know you a little bit. I just want to say, I had to look up PKWARE because I'm like, PKWARE, they've been around forever. I looked it up, 1986. The company is ancient in internet terms, and if anybody doesn't know, and you can set me straight if I'm wrong, but PKWARE is kind of the reason why we don't use tarballs anymore. We use zip files. Am I right?
That's correct. PKWARE was the founder, inventor, creator, whatever term you want to throw on it, of the zip file. They've, of course, since matured. They've gone into encryption, redaction, masking, discovery, right? A lot of different avenues. And we can go into that more later. I think it'll tie in nicely with our topic today.
Sure. I just had to throw that out there because it was bugging me. It's like PKWARE. I know that. They're PK zip. They're PK unzip. They're the creators of the zip file. So anyway, Chris, tell us about yourself, your background, how you got into cybersecurity, and in particularly privacy, how you landed at PKWARE, what you do at PKWARE. Go.
So I'll try to make this quick because this can get pretty long pretty fast. My whole career started at the Pentagon, working as a government contractor, did Army, did Congress, Senate, did the White House a bit, and then migrated from DC over to Hawaii, where I did special forces, a little bit of work with missile defense. So a lot of government work. Fast forward to having kids, everything else, life gets real. And I took a job over at Costco, helping them with their ultimately with their privacy and security problems that they had, largely around PCI, right? So, Jeff, you can relate.
Oh, he said it first.
Which led into, with all of my background being government, which is pseudo privacy as well, led into me taking up the charge at Costco and really running their GDPR and CCPA as well as HIPAA programs.
Well, that is very concise. Thank you. And I do have to ask the obligatory question, since you mentioned special forces, not to distract from the topic. Ever seen one of these things?
Absolutely.
Just for reference, for those that are just listening, I invented a little thing called the whiz wheel that was used by special forces. So whenever I meet someone that's ex-special forces, I have to ask if they remember it. So, but enough about me. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about data privacy. So, before we jump into the conversation at large, we do like to ask all of our guests what we call the hot seat question. And this is just sort of get to know you, level set, since we are a show about security and compliance. Chris Penn, where do you fall on what we like to call the security versus compliance continuum?
So I like to say, obviously, you can have security without compliance, right? Because you can just lock everything away, one means or another. But a lot of organizations, I've noticed, have taken compliance to kind of drive their security, which leads to, oftentimes wrong controls used for wrong reasons. But that is what I'm seeing. So I guess that would be my broad statement, is that you can have security without compliance, but not necessarily the other way around. The question that I add on to that, Jeff, and maybe you can answer this, I'd love to hear your take. What is the difference between privacy and security?
Hey, it's my show. I get to ask the questions. I have no idea. I was hoping you'd set us straight, frankly.
So
I'll say this. I'll caveat that too with, very often on our show, and even on the main show, if I'm around, I'll try to pin down people on definitions on some of the broad and basic terminology we use in this industry. So I suspect that there is no universal definition or acceptance of what is the meaning, similarities, or contrasts between security and privacy. So with that low bar, please enlighten us.
So what I like to say, and this was actually an interesting interview question that I got asked a long time ago, is what is that difference between security and privacy? And really, the difference comes down to, as I mentioned just a little bit ago, you can have security in whatever flavor, right? When not thinking about anything else, you just lock it away. No one can access the data. Your security, thumbs up, right? In privacy, it's about transparency and enabling access to the data, quite frankly, but to the right people and those who are supposed to have access, right? So I like to say security is about locking it away. Privacy is kind of about unlocking it, making it available.
Is it fair to try to apply the data security triad to privacy? Do the C and the I and the A, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, do they apply in any way, shape, or form to data privacy?
Yeah, absolutely. Right, because if you open everything up, it's going to be too broad. It's going to be too open. Integrity, right? You want to make sure it's the right data. You want to make sure it's accurate data and it's not being tampered with. And then the availability, which goes back to the transparency part, right? If someone wants to know what you have, why you have it, you've got to be able to provide it.
I guess one other question that I've always wanted to ask a data privacy person is sort of confirm a hunch. And I think we talked about this, when we spoke last week about our topic for today, or maybe not, because I'm old and I forget who I talked to. A couple of years ago, the Anthem breach, big, huge breach, HIPAA related. But as it was first coming out, I thought, well, I'll bet you what happened was Anthem was completely HIPAA compliant, which is all about keeping healthcare data away from the names of the patients so that you can't associate specific data with names. Is that in essence what data privacy is about? Is the data itself in particularly sensitive, or is it always in association with tying it back to, I guess, to use the term loosely, people, places, and things?
Yeah, the term has been expanded since the likes of GDPR and CCPA came out, and now CDPA, the latest Virginia law, is just tacked onto that. But the definition, broadly speaking, is anything that could potentially identify a person or a household, right? So when you think about things like cross streets, you may not necessarily think that's personal, but it could be. The traditional laws and regulations that we've seen, the HIPAAs, the COPAs, the PCI of the world, if you will, they all focus in on one or two pieces of data, maybe a subset of types of data, but not necessarily on anything that could be associated, right? Under HIPAA, just as an example, if I only have your name and email address, it's not HIPAA, right? And it's not PCI. So where does that fall? In America, that doesn't fall anywhere.
Does it fall anywhere in Europe with GDPR?
Absolutely does. With a name and an email address, you can pretty confidently identify somebody.
Gotcha. So that's an interesting perspective. It's I guess a lot of it has to do, and I'm trying to get the term right that you use, finding the locations, trying to find the locations of people and families, presumably to protect them from physical harm, ultimately.
Physical harm, but also identity theft, right? And just it could be PR, it could be reputational. It's just I don't know, the sense of security within yourself, right? Like, how safe are you online? How much money are these?
I know that one. You're not.
Yeah. How much money are organizations making off of you as the consumer without you knowing about it, right? Like, you buy a new TV, $500, and then the company turns around and makes $1,500 off the data you gave them to buy that TV. How is that fair, right?
Right. Okay.
Well, a lot of the regulation, especially over in Europe, has been put towards individual pieces of data, whereas the U.S. looks at it as a concatenation of data, right? So having email and a name is not enough in the U.S., but it is in Europe. Whereas having an email, name, and social security number in the U.S. is enough. So it's correct me if I'm wrong here. It's the concatenation that we're looking at, right?
So CCPA, CDPA, so the California, Virginia law, they've largely followed GDPR at this point. So now if you have a name or an email address, that is personal information. If I have a name and a physical address, or if I have a cross street and a physical address and maybe no name, right, that's still personal information. Even in America, we're starting to step a little bit away from, the traditional PII, the personal identifiable information, and going more towards PI, which is just personal information. It doesn't necessarily have to be identifiable for us to have to secure it.
So what drove Virginia to do this?
So Virginia is following suit of CCPA for sure. CCPA came to be because of Europe, right? Seeing GDPR and all the regulation, everything else. These large companies, think Facebook, Walmart, Twitter, etc. They do business globally, right? And the question is how do they safely transfer data between the EU and the Americas? And quite frankly, when GDPR came out, Privacy Shield was going away. This guy, Max Schrems, I don't know if you guys have heard of him, but he's this big privacy lawyer advocate, and he loves shutting down safeguards and mechanisms that organizations use to transfer data. He challenges them and oftentimes wins, which leads the whole world to essentially scramble at the last minute and say, oh, okay, we were doing business yesterday in this manner, and now we can't do that anymore. I can't transfer that data anymore because the court ruled overnight that it isn't just. And so in order to get those adequacy levels to be able to freely transfer data between Europe and the US, some law like CCPA, right? Something like that would have to be in place in order for the EU to rule that law and all of its requirements meet the safeguard check and the requirements that the EU wants to see. And it's really a stab at trying to get some sort of a federal movement around privacy, because what a lot of companies do not want, and I think even the citizens do not want, is for the US to treat data privacy like they treated tax law, right? Where every state has their own tax law and everything's done a little bit differently. It would be a lot easier and a lot nicer if we just had one federal law that said, okay, here's 9/10 of the ruling, if you will. And then you can have nuances and things, but
or even like a cheat sheet for state by state, like regulation, right? Like how do we make this easier? It's one thing to say, okay, in California, Virginia, Utah, Maine, whatever, all of these rules apply, and then here's a list of the nuances per state. Would that be correct?
Yeah. So from a lawyer standpoint, right, they may very well do that, because if they have to go to court, they're going to start defending, well, I didn't do that there because it's not one of the nuances, or it's not applicable in that state, or whatever. But from an organizational standpoint, they go through and they say, okay, well, here's all the nuances, right? Which privacy law in the states, covers all or most of this, and I'll just follow that one. Oftentimes that's California, right? Depending on the law we're talking about. But versus following a federal law, people start following the strictest state, which I don't think is a situation that the government wants us to be in, but it's one we're quickly heading towards.
So in dealing with data is only like one arena that should be looked at, right? So you've got data, you've got PI, you've got PII, and in doing research for this episode, I came across a news article talking about how Chile is going after, and I think it is, and I'll make sure to post this article down in the Discord. If you're not part of the Discord, go join. But they're talking about brain manipulation and neuro rights. Is that a place that we could go eventually down the road? Is that something that could be folded into how these laws are being made moving forward? Like, I guess what I'm really trying to ask is, it's one thing to go after PI and PII and try to say what is and what is not, but is that the only landscape that we need to take a look at for privacy?
It's not. I haven't encountered the brain manipulation area that you were reading about just yet, but I have encountered biometrics and retinals and as well as other things, and a lot of that is obviously it's very personal. Even brain manipulation, if they were going down some sort of mind altering thing, I think Elon Musk has something going on, right? That guy's always got stuff going on.
Yeah, I was just talking about that on the Discord. So they've got games that quadriplegics can now control with their brain, and that's great because you can output from your brain. And for people that are disabled, paraplegics, quadriplegics, that's fantastic. But what about the other way? Can you input signals? And there was a book that had a TASP in it, which is basically they did experiments like this in the 60s. They put a wire into the pleasure center of a rat's brain and gave it a key that would send an electrical signal down. And food right next to it. They would press their lever rather than eat, and they would die.
Armadillo, tinfoil lined hats.
Why does it have to be armadillo? I think that any leather would work just fine. It doesn't have to be armadillo. I don't know why you're so specific.
Does the brain speak TCP or UDP?
I don't know. I think if it was UDP, it would get lost all the time.
Well,
it might be closer to
Jeff
UDP,
just wouldn't remember.
What were we talking about?
So
there's another.
What other types of privacy stuff can we get into with the laws that are currently being created? So let's say a lawmaker for God unknown reason happens to watch our show. If you were able to say, okay, we need to look at PII, but also ABC 123, what would the ABC 123 be?
Well, that's an interesting question. Just because the way they've described these terms, right? It's anything that can be related to or potentially identify a person or a household. The brain manipulation stuff that could clearly identify a person because you're going to see their thought patterns. You're going to see, the way their brain works. You're going to see all these kinds of nuances.
We can go off the neural stuff for a little while. It's okay, I promise.
I'm just thinking like what other data is out there, right? They've already captured things like cookies and browsing history. All of that is personal as well. So I think they've already gone beyond just what you and I would think of as personal, right? They've gone into the digital world as well. The type of laptop you're on, the type of desktop you're on, the system specs of your PC, the geographics of your IP address, your ISP provider. It's all deemable personal with context, right? I don't know as if these laws around privacy will ever leave the person, right? The person is the key element here. But the data that could be encompassed in that could be anything. As long as it ties back to a person. The moment you remove a person from the equation, these privacy laws largely don't apply. And it leads you down the route of security, as we spoke about earlier. You were talking about the Elon Musk thing, and how do you ensure that person's thought process? How do you ensure that's not being breached? Well, that's not necessarily a security thing or a privacy thing. It's more of a security thing, right? So Elon and his staff and all the providers of that type of technology will have to take into consideration what type of data are they collecting through which avenue, and is it a secured method?
So I think this is an important distinction to make, and hopefully you can help to illuminate this if I'm drawing the wrong conclusion. First off, I did want to say the reason why we ask you all sorts of different questions is because it makes different parts of your brain light up while we're mapping you, while we're
Sure.
recording you. Aside from that, I don't know how many years ago was it that big data was a thing. Companies and this came up a lot in the PCI world. Since I was working with a lot of retailers that were collecting a lot of data on their customers, like what do they purchase and how many and where and things like that, all for the purposes of customer loyalty programs and to be able to spew out the right kind of coupon and or stock the right kind of inventory in the right kind of places. All sorts of really great, seemingly legitimate reasons to track all this data. And I guess the distinction that I would like you to speak about is, when was it you're just collecting all this data about your customers in general, so you have this massive big data, versus personalized data that gets to your, the tendencies and the trends of you specifically, so you can get that coupon. Or, I mean, I had a late night phone call the other night from a company that are thinking that they've been breached. They've been approached by their processor, and the next thing and they're a retailer, and the next thing I know, I'm getting ads for this retailer on my, when I opened up Facebook this morning.
Messenger
anyway,
never listens.
When
it's totally safe.
When and where were the lines blurred or crossed between just collecting all this anonymous data from your customers to, if we somehow pin it to the individual, we can make even more money?
Yeah, I think a lot of that started in, it really started back like as soon as it turned to the new century, right? It started early 2000s, and it got more dominant, more prevalent in the space. 2012, 2013, like you said, when the big data stuff started kicking off, the Hadoops, the Teradatas, now they've got Snowflake and all these other types of data lakes out there. But the more, now we like to say that data is the money maker. Data is the gold or the oil of the organization, right? And it's because of what you were just saying. Just based on your shopping history with whichever retailer it is, or even maybe it's not a retailer, maybe it's your healthcare organization. How often do you go in for physicals? How often do you go in for this? How often do you go in for that? You went in for X, and then next thing you know, you got 3 follow-up appointments for, Y and Z. All of this type of analytics is done, as you said, to say, hey, well, if we charge 10 cents more for this thing, then we'll make $150,000 more. For healthcare, it's largely about what's next year's rates look like.
I mean, look at AT&T. They charged, I think it was AT&T. They put a $1 or 99-cent fee, an administrative fee into their cell phone bills. And if you called up, they immediately took it off, and it came back the next month, and you could call up and take it off again. But most people are like, yeah, whatever. It's $1. Who cares? They made $100 million a month off that.
Yep. Yeah, it's these little things, and it's the data science, as they call it, is really about measuring your customer base's threshold for tolerance. It's like how much can we push and milk out of these guys before they start calling us, like that Buck99 you're just mentioning, to go and rectify something. And this has been a larger issue in the U.S. than it has been in the EU, I will say, because we are. You may have heard this term, but we're a default opt-in country, right? Whereas the European Union has always been a default opt-out, meaning you have to electively opt into something in Europe if you want whatever the service or newsletter thing is. In the US, we just assume you're going to get that newsletter. You want that newsletter. You came here for that newsletter. And so now I'm going to email you every 5 minutes until you tell me not to.
It's and to the 3 of you, I had a little bit of a revelation here. It's like we worry about the attackers always being one step ahead of us. But can we make the same correlation between attackers and people that want to target data collection? When is the industry going to look at that as an attack, like an actual bad actor method?
To what regard?
Yeah, back up a step, Scott. I apologize. I might.
No. It's okay. I can totally repeat it. It's like we worry about attackers being one step ahead of us as defenders, right? We hear that moniker thrown around all the time in the information security community. But can we make the same correlation between attackers and people that target data collection? And when are we going to recognize that as an attack vector?
When you say people that target data collection, are you talking about like Facebook? They do a lot of data collection, or are you talking about attackers that are targeting Facebook?
Well, if think about it though, like we've got all these privacy regulations that are coming out now that say, we can't have PII, we can't have PI, we can't transmit this, we can't do that. When are we going to start classifying people who write these programs that suck up all of this data that we're trying to obviously have laws in place now to protect? When can we classify them as attack vectors or bad actors or threat actors to our personal livelihoods?
Well, I think to restate your question, to put it more succinctly, and I believe
Please.
the fourth is kind of saying it on Discord, when are we going to start looking at all the corporations that are collecting all this data rather than the quote-unquote bad guys that are out there stealing the data?
Yeah, I think we're seeing some of that now with, just in the last year or two, we've seen Facebook and Zuckerberg and, all the Google executives and everybody. We've seen them in court battling for one reason or another, whether it's a data breach or, legal folks believe that these organizations are collecting data that is outside the required use case. Right, which is one of the things that CCPA and CDPA, stipulate, which is you should only ever collect data that is needed for the purpose specified. Meaning, if you're going to some retailer site, right, and you want to buy that new TV, realistically, all they need is your credit card number, your bank, however you're going to pay for this thing, your name and your mailing address, right? And an email address could arguably be optional, right, if you want to provide it. But they shouldn't be asking for things like your social security numbers during that transaction. I don't know about you, but I've never needed a social to buy a TV. They shouldn't be asking about your gender, because why does that matter? It doesn't matter if you're male or female to buy the TV. But you see this in a lot of places. I've seen this, at previous places I've worked. You try to sign up for a membership, and they're already asking, "Are you male or are you female?" Right? And it's not even an optional field; it's a required field. But the business itself doesn't give a discount or different promotions or even run marketing based on your gender. It was just an attribute they were picking up because they could, right? They had no intended purpose for it. And that's one of the areas these laws are targeting, is make sure that the type of business and the type of service or product that you're providing, you're only collecting data that's relevant to it.
Long pause. So we haven't really talked a whole lot of specifically the Virginia law itself and how it is the same or different as the California law and GDPR. And I do want to sort of drill down specifically into the who, what's, where's, when's, why's, and how's, because that seemed to be a good flow of the conversation. May I suggest we take a quick break? We'll come back and we'll do just that. So hang in there. We'll be right back.